down, close your eyes, center yourselves in the Spirit of the Lord. And I'm going to read a passage from the book of Genesis that Father has asked us to think about as the procession begins. The Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grave, that I must go down and see whether or not their actions fully correspond to the cry against them that comes to me. I mean to find out." While the two men walked on farther toward Sodom, the Lord remained standing before Abraham. Then Abraham drew nearer to him and said, "Will you sweep away the innocent with the guilty? Suppose there were 50 innocent people in the city. Would you wipe out that place rather than spare it for the sake of the 50 innocent people within it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to make the innocent die with the guilty, so that the innocent and the guilty would be treated alike. Should not the judge of all the world act with justice?" The Lord replied, "If I find 50 innocent people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham spoke up again, "See how I am presuming to speak to my Lord, though I am but dust and ashes. What if there are 5 less than 50 innocent people? Will you destroy the whole city because of those 5? "I will not destroy it," he answered, "if I find 45 there." But Abraham persisted, saying, "What if only 40 are found there?" He replied, "I will forbear doing it for the sake of the 40. Then he said, "Let not my Lord grow impatient if I go on. What if only 30 are found there?" He replied, "I will forbear doing it if I can find but 30 there." Still he went on, "Since I have thus dared to speak to my Lord, what if there are no more than 20? "I will not destroy it," he answered, "for the sake of the 20. But he still persisted, "Please, let not my Lord grow angry if I speak up this last time. What if there are at least 10 there?" "For the sake of those 10, he replied, "I will not destroy it." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Still And be seated. Good evening to all of you. Again, I realize the tremendous sacrifice you're making to be here this evening. I hope and pray to God to be worth your sacrifice. And again, I would urge you, during time of mission, extraordinary things do happen. I'm a firm believer in prayer. I've seen it happen too many times to have a question about it, but I've seen it every time. Men, women, and children have been praying for years because the Kurt's mission got answered. From the very time of Jesus, when his apostles, his disciples, they went up 2 by 2 to preach. When they came back, they said, Jesus, you can't imagine what we've done. And Jesus said, greater things than that would happen. So I would say, open your mind and heart, because we all have requests. Now's the time to ask of God. I would like to put a word in for our sponsor. And that is, there are other vocations besides Mary's, namely to the sisterhood, brotherhood, and priesthood. If any one of you happens to be interested in information, sisterhood, brotherhood, or priesthood, I would ask with a separate piece of paper, I would receive your name and address, your age, level of education, phone number. I will send you the information. Maybe if you want to be like a Jesuit, write down Jesuit, or you want to be diocesan, or you want to be Dominican or Franciscan, or whatever, sister, brother, or priest. If you want information on the priesthood and you do not put down what kind of priest you want, I'll figure you want to become a redemptorist like me and don't know how to spell a word. So you get information on the redemptorist, all right? I do this for 2 reasons. Scripturally, it's founded. That's all that Jesus did was ask, would you like to come and follow me? And he wasn't too choosy, as I tried to show last night in picking the 12 apostles. What a motley group of people. When you look at it at the very end, 1 betrayed him, 1 denied him, and 10 took off. Not too good of an average. But he figures with his grace, he can change them and they can change the world. Second reason I bring this up is practically it works. You might say this is how I acquired my invitation to the priesthood. A Redemptorist missionary came into our parish in San Diego, St. Charles Borromeo. He was offering or celebrating the mission. My brothers and I, we were serving him. During that mission, he said, if anybody's interested in information, sisterhood, brotherhood, priesthood, why don't you write down your name and address, age of education, your phone number, and your age, of course. I'll seek information. Who knows, maybe someday you could end up giving a mission with me. My brother wrote down my name and address. One thing followed the next. My brother and I both went to the seminary. My brother and I were both ordained priests. My brother's first mission was in the jungles of Brazil. My first mission was with that same missionary. It does work. This has been a word for our sponsor. As you realize, tomorrow we will conclude the mission service in the morning at 7 with Mass and also instruction and confession tomorrow morning. Also tomorrow evening we will have confession, reconciliation. And as I have been announcing time after time, it will be like coming to communion, that quick and that easy. Again, the reason I do this because in my life as a priest, I've come across so many Catholics. In fact, I'm convinced that every Catholic had a bad experience going to confession. And it should have never happened. Should have never happened. It should be like coming to communion, a joy and a pleasure. Again, where on earth can you acquire the metaphysical absolute certitude your sins are forgiven? Baptism, confession. Where else can you get it? Something I'll explain tomorrow in some detail. This is at both services. My reason for bringing this up is maybe you could be instrumental in bringing others. They've had terrible problems. Tell them it'll be like coming to communion that quick. Again, it will not be public confession. It will not be general absolution. It will be private, direct, or personal. There's another announcement, and I'm trying to think of what it is. Please stand. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Ever dawned on you why we carry the scriptures in procession? Why we incense it and we enthrone it on the altar? Ever dawned on you why we do that? Well, take the word Bible. Take the word Bible, its meaning. Bible, basic information before leaving earth. Let's try that. Basic information before leaving earth. Not really, but apropos, it's very fitting, wouldn't you say? This is Jesus' instruction here. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, Teacher, which commandment of the law is the greatest? He said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is how you fulfill the first. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Lord Jesus Christ.
And be seated. They say that a man is only half of a man until he gets married. And then they say he's finished. Or I'm sure you heard the recent fictitious survey that was taken. They finally realize that most girls marry a man very much like her father. That is the reason they believe that mothers cry at weddings. Or maybe you heard that story about the highway patrol stopped this couple. He came to the driver's window, and the driver said, Officer, why did you stop me for anyway? He said, Sir, you were speeding. He said, I was going 64 to 65 miles an hour. His wife sitting right there said, Oh, no, you weren't. I keep telling you not to drive so fast. Shut up! The police officer said, Well, your safety belt's off also. What do you expect, officer? I had to get my wallet to get my license, didn't I? His wife said, Oh, no, you weren't. I keep telling you to wear the safety belt. Shut up! And the police officer says, Ma'am, is he always that mean to you? Oh, no, officer, only when he's drinking. I remember a few years ago, I was in the San Francisco area, San Jose area, and I went to the Winchester Mansion. I'm sure many of you have been to that Winchester Mansion. It's quite unique. Just to give you a little background of the Winchester Mansion. The inventor of the Winchester rifle. When he and his wife died, of course, the estate was left to his son. And of course, when he died, the estate was left to his wife. A psychic came to Mrs. Winchester, and the psychic said, Mrs. Winchester, as long as you have workers work in your mansion, you will live. The day you cease to have workers work in your mansion, you will die. Mrs. Winchester had workers in her home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 38 years. What is unusual about the mansion is not its size. Yeah, over 182 rooms. But it's what you see in it that's so unusual. I mean, you come in one door, beautiful stained glass window. It's magnificent, but it's on the floor. I mean, you have to avoid from stepping into it. You come into another room, it has a set of steps, first floor to second floor. If you have a set of steps in your home, how many steps do you have? 15, 20 max. But not in this room. Must have been close to 64 steps, about 2.5 inches in size. It goes one, right to the ceiling. It doesn't even open to the second floor. Now, the room that hit me most was on the second floor. When they closed that door, I looked around that. I looked at that room and I thought, this room explains exactly what married life is about. Now, why would I make that statement? Actually, from all the marriage counseling work I have done, from courses I've taken, from confession, from other sources, that room hit me because, well, it wouldn't be any bigger than your living room, but there had to have been at least 13 to 21 doors in that room. I mean, can you imagine what your living room would look like if it had 13 doors in it? Quite unusual. You open one door, the wall is there. Another door, closet. Another door, a window. Another door won't even open. Now again, why would that impact upon me a concept that this room explains what married life is about? As I said, from all the marriage counseling courses I've taken, all the confession work, etc. I thought, when a couple are engaged, all the doors of life are open to them. I mean, they don't have enough time to be together. They'll actually steal time from work or study just to be together because all the doors of life are open to them. For some unknown reason, once they get married, they start the process of closing doors. One of them says, well, I don't ever hear about this again. So that door goes closed. Later, the other says, well, I don't ever hear about this again. So that door goes closed. After X amount of time, all the doors of married life are closed. And in amazement, the spouses will say, don't we have anything to talk about? What's there to talk about? All the doors of married life have been closed. Look at your own married life. How many doors of your married life have been closed? You'd love to open them, wouldn't you? But you can't open those doors. Last time you tried to open that door, your spouse slammed it in your fingers and you swore to God you'd never do that again. Maybe the words of God are apropos. God said, seek wisdom, seek counsel. It can be found. Or again, even Jesus said, keep seeking, keep asking, keep knocking. The door will be open. Maybe you need professional guidance to ajar or open a particular door of your married life. Yeah, maybe it's going to cost you $50, $75, $100 an hour. I'm sure some of you pay $1,000 to open a particular door of your married life in which you felt that you were free and sincere and honest, without reprisal, to discuss with your spouse. Yeah, I'm sure some of you pay $1,000 to do that. To be that open, that honest, and that sincere, without reprisal. Tonight, with the hope of the Holy Spirit, we're going to try to adjust a few of these doors of married life. I can sense at this very moment, some of you are saying to yourself, because of my present state and state of life, I really don't need this information at all. Not in your own personal life, you don't. But I'd like to remind you, you're a much a member of this church as I am. Yes, you're a much a member of this church as I am. Maybe this information will help you to help others. Why do I say this? Well, they tell us today there's only one marriage in 150 that's ecstatically happy. Yeah, out of 150 marriages, there's only one that's ecstatically happy. Yet with the same breath, they say 90% of marriages can be like that. Your marriage should be the ecstaticness of joy and pleasure. Your marriage should be a constant honeymoon. You have been called to have peace on earth. You have the goodwill. But it is a learned process. Sad that it is presently, it's estimated about 85% of our present marriages are so miserable. They would actually separate if they could. Yet in the very same breath, they make evidently clear 98% of marital problems can be solved. Yes. It's said today that 6,000 couples will get married in the United States. 6,000 will get married in the United States today. Half of them will end in divorce. So maybe you do not need this information in your own personal life. But maybe this information could help you to help others. Why? Because you're the church to many people. For some of you right here, you are the counselor to people who come to you They pour their heart and soul out, telling you all their problems and difficulties. Remember, 85% of the profession of psychology is listening. 85% of counseling is listening. Right now you're doing that. They dump on you, your children perhaps, your neighbors, your friends, your relatives. They dump on you, don't they? Maybe this information will help you to help them. Can you imagine the good you could acquire? For they make very clear, 98% of marital problems can be solved. Your marriage should be an ecstaticness of joy and pleasure. It should be a constant honeymoon. You have been called to have peace. You have the goodwill, but it is a learned process. That is why the church has always urged, before you enter this covenant, this contract, seek and search to find that person you readily, easily can love. Seek and search for someone you can readily, easily love. Yes, in seeking and searching for someone you're going to spend the rest of your life. Or rather, I should say, how different man and woman are. That's why you're urged to have as much in common as you possibly can. They tell us today a baby, 3 months of conception, has 100 billion brain cells, 1 trillion brain connections, and that brain is functioning at that very level of 3 months of conception, picking up its mother's world, and will live these experiences all the days of their life. They tell us the most you can learn of yourself in your lifetime. If you have an open mind, you avail yourself of all the revelations God is revealing to us in our present day, the most you can hope to understand of who you really are is only 20%. 80% of you and I will remain hidden from the conscience of our minds. And that 80% will affect everything you believe, think, say, and do. Yes, man and woman are uniquely different. And that is why the church has always urged, before you enter this covenant, seek and search to find that person you readily, easily can love. Yes, in seeking and searching for someone you're going to spend the rest of your life, it is natural, it is normal, it is ordinary to be exposed to perhaps the second highest drive of human nature, called sexual pleasure outside of marriage. Yes, in seeking and searching for someone you're going to spend the rest of your life, it is natural, it is normal, it is ordinary to be exposed to the second highest drive of human nature, called sexual pleasure outside of marriage. But God, in His divine revelation, and Jesus through His teachings in 2,000 years, it is made very clear that sexual pleasure outside of marriage is wrong. And the reason is not to take the fun out of the relationship, but rather to protect the individuals involved. For example, take the exchange of marital relations outside of marriage. Who takes all the chances? Predominantly the girl does more than the guy. The greatest moment in a woman's life should be the realization she has conceived. And yet it can be the very pits of life herself, to the realization she has conceived and she's not even married. Does he go through that from the height to the bottom? No. For him, it was a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. He probably doesn't even know what's happened anyway. Now she's faced with 5 major decisions. The first decision she's faced is to seek an abortion, so she can act as if everything is normal, everything is fine. What a terrible decision, to take innocent little mind to act that everything is fine, everything is good. If she makes that decision, she has to live with that decision. They say the older you grow comes a greater awakening, the greater understanding of what that person has made that decision. Yes, the older she grows will come the greater awakening and awareness of it. Does he go through that awakening? For him, it was a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. He probably doesn't even know what's happened anyway. The second major decision would be to have the child and give the child for adoption. If she makes that decision, she's got to live with that all the days of her life. And it's made very clear, the older she grows, grows will come the greater awakening, the greater wonderment. I wonder where, I wonder who, I wonder how. Will he go through this wonderment? Not really. For him, it was a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. He probably doesn't even know what's happened anyway. The third decision will be to have the child and have her parents raise this child as her little brother or little sister. Every morning she awakens to the reality, this is not my little brother, my little sister. This is my son, my daughter. A readjustment of her entire life from that point on. Does he awake to this in the morning? Not really. For him, it was a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. He probably doesn't even know what's happened anyway. Or the fourth decision would be to try to raise the child herself. God knows how difficult it is to raise a child with two parents, let alone one. Even though today it's estimated 49.4% of mothers with children are single mothers. Almost 50% right now. How difficult it is to raise a child with two parents, let alone one. If she makes that decision, that means she's going to have to get some help. That means, most probably, her education is going to dead end. I mean, can she go to school, raise a child that demands 24 hours a day? If she's in her work, she can. Many do. But it's asking an awful lot for her to do that. That means her education probably will be frozen at that level. Maybe the 7th grade, or even 8th grade, or 9th, or 10th, 11th, or 12th, or 1st college, or 2nd. Her education probably will be frozen at that level. Is he faced with that kind of decision? Not really. For him, he can go right on through high school, college, postgraduate, the intellectual levels of the world. Why? For him, it was a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. He probably doesn't even know what's happened either. If she makes a decision to try to raise a child and go to school, is she going to be able to share life the way her classmates do? To go for parties and recreation and entertainment? No. After class, her child demands her presence now. Like a magnet, her child will attract her to take care of her child. Is he faced with that? Not really. He could have the fullness of life. It was only a moment of pleasure to be forgotten anyway. He probably doesn't know what's happened anyway. Most probably, she's going to have to get a job. With that kind of an education, that's the kind of job she'll get. And that means, can she use that money like her girlfriends for recreation, entertainment? Not really. Her child demands, give me, give me, give me. Like a magnet, it will attract it. If he gets a job, is he faced with a decision? Probably not. For him, a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. He probably doesn't know what's even happened. Most probably, she's going to have to come to the state and ask the state, would you assist my child and myself? That means swallowing her pride, filling out all those forms, standing in those lines, and with an asking, look, you knew better. Why did you? She has to go through this for her child's sake. Is he faced with that situation? Not really. You think he's going to stand in line, fill out these forms, and swallow his pride? He's a man. He doesn't have to. For him, a moment of pleasure to be forgotten. Perhaps because she does seek this welfare, this situation, then because of the new laws, he is going to hit with that. And that means that he will have to pay support until that child of his reaches 18. Estimated at over $180,000 he will have to pay unless he can manage to get away from it. But she's faced with it now. The fifth decision would be to get married. If she gets married because of the child, human nature being what it is, you're bound to have a disagreement, and all you need is one simple statement. The only reason I married you is because, like a dagger to her heart, it will destroy her. That is why it is estimated 7 of 10 of these marriages end in divorce. 7 of these 10 marriages end in divorce. Today, this is going on. Almost 50% of mothers with children are living single lives to the best of their ability. In seeking and searching for someone you're going to spend the rest of your life, it is natural, it is normal, it is ordinary to be exposed to the second high of human nature called sexual pleasure outside of marriage. But again, as God has made very clear through his revelations and teaching of his son Jesus through 2,000 years of the church's teaching, sexual pleasure outside of marriage is wrong. And again, the reason is not to take the fun of the relationship, but rather to make us realize just who on earth we really are. As I tried to get across to you yesterday, you have been paid a great price. As St. Paul the Apostle said, you're just like this tabernacle. You're temples of the Holy Spirit. God the Father, Son, and Spirit live and dwell within your very being. That's why there's dignity, importance, and value in your very being. That's why you are good. Or again, as St. Paul himself said to the early Christians, you have become like God. To desecrate ourselves for sexual pleasure is wrong. To use a person made in God's image and likeness to gratify our selfishness is wrong. That is the reason. It is the desecration of ourselves and the utilization of a person made in God's image and likeness to gratify our selfishness. But yes, in seeking and searching, it's necessary to be exposed to this greatest drive of human nature. If the guy really loves her, the guy ought to be honest enough and sincere enough to say to his girlfriend, honey, I love you. Honey, if you're willing to give up your health for my sake, if you're willing to give up your education for my sake, if you're willing to put your financial future on the line for me, if you're willing to put your whole life on the line for me, I'll let you know I love you weakly enough to put my name on the line for you. We call that putting one's name on the line a documentation, a willingness to share the responsibility of the repercussions of the act of love, which is the greatest act for a husband and wife. Yes, a responsibility to accept the responsibility of this union, of this love. But again, in seeking and searching, it's necessary to seek Him. That is why it is always urged, before you enter this covenant, the two of you are so uniquely different. The most you could hope to learn of yourself in your lifetime is only 20%. 80% of yourself and myself is hidden from the conscience of our minds. It affects everything we believe, think, say, and do. Isn't a husband the first to recognize this difference? What does a husband say of his wife? I'll never understand this woman. Never. He can't figure her out. What does a wife say of her husband? Oh, I can read him like a book. He's so simply easily read. Yes. The most you can hope to learn of yourself is only 20%. No one has ever attained that. No one has ever attained that. I'm sure you're very familiar with the serial plays that used to be on television all the time. Archie Bunker, All in the Family. Archie Bunker and Edith. On a scale of 1 to 20, Archie Bunker would have hit about a 2. Edith would have hit about a 2.5. How would you rate yourself to Archie Bunker or to Edith? The most you can hope to understand is 20%. Nobody's ever reached even 12%. I'll tell you one thing, if you ever come across a person who's got their act together, you will be amazed and you'll never forget that person. That they have brought their act together in such a way that they're so mature and so honest, and so understanding, and so wise. They might have hit 11 or 12. Most of us never even hit past an 8. And that is unusual to reach that. Remember, the more mature you become, the more immature you're going to realize you really are. The more knowledge you acquire, the more you're going to realize what you don't understand and what you don't know. The more wise you become, the more unwise you're going to realize you really are. The more holy you become, the more unholy you're going to realize you really are. The more you love your wife or husband, the more your important in understanding. For example, the more mature you become, you're going to realize how immature you are. You don't quit, do you? Archie Bunker did. The more knowledge, like Archie Bunker, I'm satisfied myself. If you reach the point in your marriage in which you love your wife or know your wife, and you're satisfied, you've already started to die in married life. It's not necessary to attain the ideal. It is the process that's called maturity, wisdom, knowledge, and love. Again, the more you love your wife or husband, the more you're going to realize you really do not love. It should urge you for greater depth. Only one marriage in 150 is ecstatically happy right now. 90% of marriages can be like that. Your marriage should be a constant extendance of joy and pleasure. I think before I continue, we'll stand and stretch and join in a couple of verses of a hymn. You heard the story in San Diego where the guy was talking to God. He said to God, God, could you make a bridge from San Diego to Hawaii? God said, impractical, impractical, ask something practical. He said, well, Lord, can you tell me how women think? God said, do you want 2 lanes or 4 lanes? Man and woman are uniquely different. And that is why it is always urged to enter into this covenant as much in common as you possibly can. That's why it's always urged, try to have the same educational background in common. If one has an education of a postgraduate education, and one has a grammar school education of their life, you can't be normal, this kind of marriage, hoping normally will be happy. Normally, this kind of marriage is very unhappy. Only with love can you breach this educational difference. One is going to have to learn and one is going to have to teach. And you can't be normal in that kind of marriage, you're hoping normally will be happy. Only with love can you breach this educational difference. That's why it's always urged, try to have the same cultural background in common. If your spouse has been raised in a culture different than yourself, you'll never understand the where and why for of their actions or reactions. And you can't be normal with this kind of marriage. You're hoping normally will be happy. Normally, this kind of marriage is very unhappy. Only with love can you breach this cultural difference. This is why it's always urged, try to have the same religious background in common. If you cannot share your inmost principles, morals, convictions with someone you love, this is a wedge in your married life. You can't be normal in this kind of a marriage and hope it normally will be happy. Normally, these kind of marriages are very unhappy. Only with love can you bridge this religious difference. And isn't this what you vow? The day you enter this covenant, you swear to God that you're going to love this man or this woman to be your spouse. Rich, well, you'll not have to work as hard to make the financial ends come together. But with that same breath, you swear to God, you're going to love this man, this woman to be your spouse. Rich or poor. That means you're just going to have to grow up. You can't keep acting like a child the rest of your life. You hope to pay these bills, bring these bills together and pay for them. You can't keep acting like a child, irresponsible. You've got to grow up if you want to pay those bills again. With that same breath, you swear to God that you're going to love this person to be your spouse. Rich or poor, healthy. Oh, you've been blessed by God. You have been blessed by God. But with that same breath, you swear to God you're going to love this person to be your spouse. Rich or poor, healthy or sickly. What a cross in life when your spouse is always sick. With that same breath, you swear to God that you're going to love this man and this woman to be your wife or husband. Rich or poor, healthy or sickly. Good. Oh, you have chosen well. You have chosen well. But with that same breath, you swear to God that you're going to love this person who is to be your husband or your wife. rich or poor, healthy or sickly, good or bad. Till death do you part. How many of a marriage stays on the rocks? Because one or both have reneged on their sworn oath. They've actually tried to change their wife or their husband to their image or likeness. And you have no right to do it. Some even have the audacity to invoke the living God to do what they know is wrong. And I'm sure you've heard some husband or wife say to their spouse, "For God's sake, can't you change?" You have no right to invoke the living God to do something that's wrong. God loves you the way you are. When was the last time God tried to change you? He loves you just the way you are. Sure, we might say he hopes you'll change, but he loves you just the way you are. Most realize they cannot invoke the living God to do something that's wrong. Therefore, they think they're going to thread that needle, and they're going to invoke Jesus to do something that is wrong. And I'm sure you've heard some husband or some wife say to their spouse, "For Christ's sake, can't you change?" You have no right to invoke Jesus Christ, the living God, to do something that's wrong. You have sworn in his covenant that you would do just the opposite. That you would actually love this person, rich or poor, healthy or sickly, good or bad, till death do you part. Well, what are some of the synonyms for the word bad you can think of? Vulgar, rude, thoughtless, inconsiderate, impatient, lazy, sloppy, drunkenness, lecherous, adulterous, non-believing, picky, naggy. See, a husband picks a wife and nags and he's complaining. What are some of the synonyms for the word bad you can think of? You swear to God that you would love that person, rich or poor, healthy or sickly, good or bad, till death do you part. How many of our marriages stay on the rocks? Because one or both have reneged on their sworn oath, and they try to change their wife or husband to their image likeness. Have no rights to it. If you want to know what Jesus is like, look to your marriage vows. Who do we find that Jesus really associated with? Thieves, murderers, prostitutes, tax embezzlers, the cruds of society. Not once are we ever told that he got up on his soapbox, looked down his nose and said to these people, "You better change, you're going to hell." Not one occasion. He did just the opposite. It was said he ate and drank with sinners. He never called these people sinners. Sure, he ate and drank with them, yet one of them died with him. You notice he never changed? He never changed what I wanted to do. But they sure changed. They wanted to be like him, didn't they? They came like flies to honey. They found him so tolerant, so understanding, so patient, so loving. They found him so Christ. They wanted to be like him. And that is the answer of Christianity. And that is the answer of marriage. When others want to be like you, because you got your act together. For all practical purposes, you must be like the eye of a hurricane. Like the eye of a hurricane. And every hurricane in the eye is completely calm, completely filled with light, placid. That's why we use candles in our worship, to remind us that Jesus is the light in darkness. That's why we refer to Jesus as peace on earth. He is the eye of the hurricane. Yet in that hurricane, all around it is darkness, pain, suffering, sorrow. You must be like the eye of the hurricane, in which you have acquired that maturity in your life. No matter how much the magnetics draw you into this hurricane, you will remain at peace in your own life. You will remain a light to others. When you're in the eye of the hurricane, you don't have to tell all those people in darkness and pain and suffering where you're at. They can see where you are. As Jesus himself said, "Anybody who sees you sees me. And anybody who sees me sees him who sent me." You must be the eye of the hurricane in your own life. That means, again, the more mature you acquire, the more immature you're going to realize you are. The more knowledge you acquire, the more you're going to realize what you don't know. the more holy you become, the more unholy you're going to realize you are. And the more you love your wife or husband, the more you're going to realize you don't. It doesn't stop you. It urges you to have greater peace. Yes, you must be the eye of the hurricane, no matter how much darkness and pain is around you. You must be the light to them. Remember, you'll never change your wife or husband anyway. You know, there's not one account in all of marriage counseling of a spouse who succeeded in changing their wife or husband to their image likeness. Not one account. I would urge you, if you ever change your wife or your husband to your image likeness, write a book. It'll be a bestseller. You know, it's estimated there's over 44 million married couples in the United States right now. At least 30 million will buy your book. If there was a book in the market right now showing you exactly how you could change your wife or your husband, wouldn't you buy it? You better believe you'd buy it. You'll never change your wife or husband to your image likeness. Oh, you can break your wife or husband. Oh, that's easy. What do you think marriage counseling is about? Marriage counseling is about broken wives or broken husbands. Oh, that's easy to do that. Why don't you love your wife or husband as you claimed, as you vowed, as you promised? Why don't you change? Why don't you change? Well, that's what you're asking of your spouse. I mean, you eat right hand, you can eat left hand. It's messy, but you can do it. Well, that's what you're asking of your spouse. Why don't you change? If you do, maybe that day will happen when your spouse will say to you, honey, how do you put up with all my idiosyncrasies, my faults, my failures, my sinfulness? Honey, how do you love me, just the way I am? Maybe then you're going to hear that prayer you've been hoping for some time. God, honey, I'd love to be like you. I'd love to be like you. And the two of you become one, not only flesh, but mind, heart, soul, and body. And that's what married life is, when the two of you become together, not only in flesh, but mind, heart, soul, body, and being. I would urge you, this is what your marriage should be like. But you got to bring your act together yourself. And that is what life is about. I think before we continue, we'll stand and stretch and join a couple of verses of another hymn. Please stand. My name is Stephen. Marriage is a covenant and a contract. That means requisites have to be present. For example, you draw up a will. I don't care how beautiful your document looks, the will. I don't care how good your intentions. If certain requisites necessary for the validity of the will is lacking, it can be contested in a court of law and declared non-binding. Marriage is a contract. Certain conditions must be present, or it can be declared non-binding. This is why you'll sometimes hear happening with Catholics. They will actually take their marriage contract to the court of the church. There the church will analyze and study that marital contract and find that one of the necessary requisites for its validity is lacking and grant it an annulment. When the church grants the annulment, it says nothing about the previous marriage. It says nothing about the children included. It simply says, this baptized Catholic did not enter into a sacramental marriage. Therefore, every baptized Catholic is entitled to enter into a sacramental marriage. Many people think that when they get divorced, they're excommunicated. This has never been a teaching of the church. Maybe you've had that experience. You've said to that person, I notice you don't go to church anymore. You used to go to church all the time. And the person said, well, I got divorced, so I'm excommunicated. And, I used to go to Mass after my divorce. And I watched how people come down to receive communion. The way I used to come down to receive communion, like a pill. You don't even avert how valuable it is, how important you can't do it. And after a few Sundays, I just quit going to church completely. Why don't you tell this person the good news? There's nothing wrong with this person. This person is Catholic as much as you and I. This person can and should practice their faith as much as you and I. The church looks upon divorce as a legal separation. In fact, the church will even counsel some couples, because of the situation involved, to seek the protective of the law, called a divorce. Yes, the church will even counsel couples, because of the situation, to seek the protection of the law, called a divorce. Once a person is baptized, once a person is divorced, they're still Catholic as much as you and I. They should practice their faith as much as you and I. And they can receive all the benefits of our faith as much as you and I. How often it happens that this individual will enter into a second marriage. As soon as they enter into this second marriage, they're still Catholic as much as you and I. They should practice their faith as much as you and I. But because they're in this second marriage, this second union, they are barred from the benefits of our faith until this can be worked out. Yes, until this can be worked out. How often it happens that the second marriage ends with divorce. As soon as it starts unraveling, leading towards divorce, all this person has to do is be reconciled. Simply coming to the church, making their confession, the priest having a power from God to be a sign of forgiveness, a sign of understanding, can recognize and reinstate that person to the fullness of life. How often that person will enter into a third marriage. As soon as this person enters into the third marriage, they're still Catholic as much as you and I. They should practice their faith as much as you and I. But because they're in this third marriage, they are barred from the benefits of our faith until this can be worked out. How often this third marriage ends with divorce? As soon as it starts unraveling, leading toward divorce, all this person has to do is be reconciled. Simply coming to confession and saying, I was married, I got divorced, I got into another marriage. And the priest, recognizing God's presence on earth for forgiveness and understanding, can grant them total forgiveness and total reinstatement. How often it happens that this person will enter into a fourth marriage? I know the question does arise. How often do you forgive a person like this anyway? Didn't Peter ask that question of Jesus? And how generous was Peter? 7 times, right? And what was Jesus' response to Peter's generosity of 7? 7 times 70. Remember, there's only one sin unforgivable, and that is the sin against the Spirit. How does that happen? When did you receive the Spirit? When you were baptized. The Holy Spirit came upon you like the Blessed Virgin Mary, and Jesus took presence in your body. You were baptized in the Spirit. When that Spirit leaves our body in rejection of the living God, is the only unforgivable sin. Why do I bring this up? It's estimated today 54% of adults in the United States are living single lives to the best of their ability. 54% of adults in the United States are living single lives to the best of their ability right now. How many of them have been married 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times? But right now they're living a single life to the best of their ability. All they have to do is be reconciled. What a wonderful occasion tomorrow night. And you know these people. You know who they are. You could be the gospel to them, the good news to them. You could tell them, tomorrow night we're having reconciliation. And the missionary says that confession will be like coming to communion. It'll be that easy and that quick. All the person has to do is accept their sinfulness. Simply coming to confession, as I will explain tomorrow, and say, I was married, I got divorced. And now I'm living a single life to the best of my ability. And they can be reinstated, and you will have been responsible for bringing them back into the fold. Better than 54% of adults are living in this stage right now. And you know who they are. Tell them not to lose hope. Reconciliation is easy. I will explain tomorrow how important and how easy it is. Marriage is a contract. Certain conditions must be present. One of the requisites I might mention, very often, people people end up in second marriages? Yes. It's estimated 10 million Catholics are living in second marriages right now. You have 2 to 3 children, we're talking better than 15 million Catholics involved in a second marriage right now. The church today is trying to reach and help them in what is called the annulment process. 75 years ago, we had 1 divorce out of 1,250 marriages. 75 years ago, we had 1 divorce out of 1,250 marriages. It was a rarity. It was an exception. How could you help that person? With the knowledge we had acquired of God's revelation, not a whole lot except to pray. Today, it's not a rarity, it's extreme. To the extent it's estimated, as I said, at least 10 million Catholics are in second marriages. Adding 2 or 3 children to that, we're talking better than 15 million Catholics. The church today is trying to reach and help these individuals in these second marriages, called the annulment process. Only 10% come to the church to seek this annulment. The majority are accepted. Those that do not receive it can reapply on different grounds. The majority would reach it. Those that do not can reapply on different grounds. My point is this: if you are in a second marriage, or you know someone who is, remind them of the words of God. Seek wisdom, seek counsel. You can find it. There's many skilled within the church who can reach and help individuals in the situation. Marriage, remember, is the Catholic Church is the greatest protector of the bond of marriage in the world right now. That's why you have all the red tape around it, to protect that union, that marriage, that family. To unravel, it takes time and expertise to be done. But it's being done and can be done. Something I'll explain tomorrow in Seeking and Searching for the Truth. Again, I would urge you, if you know anyone in a second marriage, tell them to seek the good news of an annulment. The majority acquire it. Those that don't can reapply on different grounds. Marriage is a contract. Certain conditions must be present. One of the requisites for a baptized Catholic is that you be married in the church. The reason for that is Jesus has taken this natural bond of marital love and raised it to a supernatural level, calling it a sacrament. It's no longer just a good and holy action, it's now a sacrament. Something I'll explain in just a moment. But only the church can effect the sacrament. Example, the President of the United States, with all the power he possesses right now to destroy the world, does not have the power to take, let us say, a newly educated, charismatic, gifted, intelligent man in the White House in a beautiful ceremony and say, I anoint, confirm, and ordain you a Roman Catholic priest. If the President of the United States did this, that man would not be a priest before God in the church. Why? Ordination, marriage is a sacrament. Only the church can confect the sacrament of marriage. Only the church can confect the sacrament of ordination. So if the President were to ordain, that guy would not be a priest before God in the church, because ordination, again, is a sacrament. If a teacher or sister were to take a child and go through a beautiful ceremony and say to the child, I confirm and anoint you, this child will not be confirmed before God, because confirmation is a sacrament, reserved to the church to confect as it sees fit. Marriage is a sacrament. Only the church can confect the sacrament of marriage. The church is presently saying every baptized Catholic must be married in a church, but they're not married before God in the church. That means that only this is the normal method, that a priest and 2 witnesses be present. This is the normal method. There are exceptions to this. There are exceptions to this. But the normal method for every baptized Catholic to enter into the covenant of marriage, you must be married in the church. That means a priest and 2 witnesses are present. By priest, we mean sharing priesthood. That means the Pope, the Cardinal, the Archbishop, the Bishop, the Deacon, sharing priesthood. This is the normal method in which the church will confect this sacrament of marriage. There are other exceptions, though, but this is the normal. And the reason is, Jesus has taken this natural bond to that of a sacramental level. Something I'll explain how important it is. The question does arise. People will say, well, Father, how should we treat our son or daughter? They've gone and they got married outside the church. How should we treat them? I think before we continue to this, we better stand and stretch and join a couple of verses. The question does arise. Parents will say, well, Father, how should we treat our son or daughter? They've gone and they've got married outside the church. How should we treat them? With love, with understanding. As a Christian, that's how you should treat them. The decision your son, your daughter has made is between them and God only. It's not between you, them, and God. It's between them and God only. And God himself says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Jesus himself agrees and says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Oh, sure, it hurts. Yes, it does. Your own flesh and blood, so to speak, and kick you in the teeth with everything you hold sacred. Squander all you poured in to your son, your daughter. Yeah, it does hurt, but it doesn't give you a right to judge or condemn. If we gotta love our enemies, we certainly must love those who don't believe and think and act the way we think, believe and act. I think an example might amplify how you should act if your son, your daughter got married outside the church. Remember the day when John Paul II, God rest his soul, when he was first elected Pope, about 9 years ago now. A young couple came to the Pope and they said, Your Holiness, would you officiate our wedding? John Paul II said, yes, I will. And he did. Presume your son, your daughter, in their travels, well, the Pope's travel, maybe even recently with Pope Benedict XVI. And they had said to the Pope, Your Holiness, would you officiate at our wedding? And Benedict XVI said, or Pope John Paul II had said to them, yes, on one condition. You're not allowed to let your mom and dad know we've done it. Let's see if your mom and dad believe what they taught you. Not to judge, not to condemn. And by chance you find this actually happened. Wouldn't it change your attitude completely? Presume it happened. Presume it happened. Presume your son, your daughter did get married by Benedict XVI or Pope John Paul II. Presume it. If you do, maybe that day will happen when your son, your daughter will say to you, maybe that day will happen when your son, your daughter will come up and say to you, Dad, Mom, how do you put up with all my idiosyncrasies, my faults, my failure, my sinfulness? Dad, Mom, how can you love me just the way I am? Maybe then you're going to hear that prayer you've been hoping for some time. You know, Dad, you know, Mom, God, I'd love to be like you. I'd love to be like you, Dad or Mom. And you'll be responsible for bringing your own son or daughter back to the fold. Remember, you're the only church your son or daughter knows. If they find the church intolerant, judgmental, why should they come back? You're the church to them as much as I'm the church to you. Jesus said, don't judge and I'll be judged. Sure, it hurts that they would kick you in the teeth, everything you hold sacred. Squander all you poured up. Yeah, it does hurt. But it doesn't give you a right to judge or condemn. We must be Christian at all times. And kid, you must be like the eye of the hurricane. No matter how much darkness, pain, and suffering around you, no matter how much it tries to draw you into darkness, into violence, into anger, stay at the eye of the hurricane in your life. Be a sign of light to them, a sign of peace to them. That's what you've been called, to have peace on earth. Have goodwill. Give an example. How would you expect of me if you were to invite me, let us say, for Easter or Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner with your family, and there your son, your daughter, with their spouses at that table? What would you expect of me? I would have a great time in conversation with all of you and enjoying the food. Do you think I put a trip on your son or your daughter with their spouse? By God, I'd never do that. I'm not here to judge or condemn. I'm here to be Christ to them. I don't have to teach to tell them what I believe. They know already what I believe. You've already told them, so I have to tell them. Sure, if they want to seek advice and counsel, I'm here to serve. Only way I can find peace in my life is the way I can love my neighbor. I gotta love my neighbor with my mind, my heart, my soul, my being. Only way I can do this way would treat your son or your daughter and their spouse. That is the example I would urge upon you. You are the church to them, the only church they know. That is why God grants to those who are willing to accept the tremendous responsibility of molding life for life, the great pleasure known as sexual pleasure. That is why in marriage, all sexual pleasure is good and holy. It is the means, it is the method that God has ordained, commanded to be used and utilized to bring peace, warmth, love, tenderness, goodness into one's own personal life, so that it can overflow into one's family life. Now, Jesus comes along, and he takes this natural bond of marital love and raises it to a supernatural level, making it a sacrament. It's no longer just a good and holy action. It is now a sacrament. Simply put, every husband and wife who are validly sacramentally married have marital relations. They renew the sacrament of marriage itself. It's no longer just a good and holy action. It's now a sacrament. I think before we go into this very sensitive and very important point, we ought to stand and stretch, and we'll join in another verse, because I want you to follow carefully what I'm saying, how important it is, how many are suffering needlessly now, how they can be solved. Please stand and let's join in a couple of 2 verse hours to miss this, so you can't say I'm not giving you fair warning, okay? So I would ask if each of you would take one of these mission envelopes for 2 reasons. One is a questionnaire. I hope you'll take just a few moments to fill it out. It's relatively easy, but very informative in helping me to perfect my notes. Topics I like, please list with preference. Maybe you thought Sunday's instruction in which your faith must be tested, either with a bloody persecution or scandal, doubt, and confusion. As I mentioned, Jesus was tested by Satan. Maybe that was the most informative of all the instructions. Or maybe you thought last night's was the most important. Or maybe, well, you can't do it tonight because I haven't even completed this one yet, let alone tomorrow. But I would hope that you give me a feedback what is the most important topics of the mission. First, second, third, etc. So when it comes to cutting, I'll be able to drop what is least important. Any of your comments, I'm certainly open to the mission, to your comments. What have you liked about the Parish mission? What were you looking for? What was missing? Any of your comments I'm open to. Others told me they did not come back or come to the mission. You cordially invited them. You know, I'm not coming, or I'm not coming back. I'd be very interested. I came because what brought you? Did someone invite you? Parish bulletin announcement? What was instrumental in bringing you to the Parish mission? Male, female is pretty self-evident. Also, your state of life, single, married, separated, widow, widower, or divorce. Gives an insight and understanding this questionnaire. Your occupation, maybe you're retired, maybe you're unemployed. Housewife, plumber, lawyer, dentist, doctor. Your occupation gives a deep insight and understanding in the questionnaire. Your age. Normally, I always mention you women don't have to be too honest about the age. When I see female checked, I add 10 years anyway. But really, I do not. But it is very important, because if I see like 16, it gives a different coloring of that questionnaire. Whereas if I see 99, it gives another coloring. Maybe 50 or 30, whatever. We'll kind of keep that like the seal of confession. Nobody sees this but me, all right? The second part is the offering. If you could be generous, we would appreciate it. If you write a check, as it says, make it redemptress. Make it redemptress. It is tax deductible. So make it redemptress if it is tax deductible. And it is tax deductible. Because we have over 7 in our organization, right? But I would hope that you can be generous. When we set up the parish mission, we set it up in such a way that only one parish collection is taken. Not every night, but the last night of the parish mission. Now this collection will go to help us in our apostolic work. It will go for our sick and our aged. They have served God to the best of their ability, and because of sickness, because of age, we have to support them. If we could only push assisted suicide, we could save a lot of money. But we don't do that. I want you to realize that sense of humor here. I hope we have, okay? But it is rather expensive, as you realize, to support the sick. It also goes for our seminarians. They're training and studying today to serve you people tomorrow. and is very expensive in the support of them today. It also goes for our missions of Thailand, Brazil, and Africa. I have classmates. I went to school for 15 years, 17, 13, 12 years rather, right on through, and I mean, they're in Thailand right now. They're in Africa, and they're in Brazil. They're doing the same work I am, but the odds are against them. And so we try to assist and help. So if you could be generous, we would really appreciate it. But I would like to make very clear, I am not here to take up a collection for the four missions, or sick and age or seminarians. I'm here to do the work of Jesus to the best of my ability. If you want to look at this in the reverse, you could look at it in this light. By the conclusion of tomorrow night's instruction, those of you who've made Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, in the name of the Redemptorist brothers and priests, we will have given you almost 7 hours of intensive instruction in your life, in your faith, in your religion. If you believe these 7 hours are beneficial, helpful, and you want to make an offering, then tomorrow would be your chance. Maybe you could look at it in this light. Have you ever gone to a seminar? Would you consider these 7 hours equal to the price of a seminar you've made? Or you've gone to your doctor, haven't you? How much time does your doctor give you? I know my doctor I used to have, he's retired now, but I remember he would come in, he'd put this thing around my arm, pump it up, he'd watch the gauge as it went down, he'd hit me the chest a couple of times, he'd ask me, Father, how do you feel? I said, I feel wonderful. He said, great. He'd tell me a joke, so I'd tell him a joke. And it cost me $55. And I don't think his joke was that funny, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't think my joke was that bad. Well, maybe you could look at it in that light. And if you could, we really appreciate it. It does help us. I'd like to just give you an example of one individual. When I went to the cathedral in San Diego, the 4th grade, there is this nun who taught me the 4th grade. When I went to the seminary, her brother taught my brother and I for 2 years in the seminary. When we were ordained, this priest, her brother, he was a provincial head man. He sent my brother to Brazil to give missions in the Amazon Valley. The next year when I was ordained, he sent me back to the seminary to teach, to wise up. 3 years after being provincial, he resigned. He went to Brazil. I remember 4 years ago when he came back, I said, we had dinner, lunch, my 2 sisters and my brother and his wife, and my brother's a priest also, so there's my 2 sisters and brothers. And anyway, his 2 sisters were there, both nuns. And I remember I said, Father Fitz, you're coming back to celebrate your 60th anniversary now for vacation, you know. 60 years you've been ordained. How big was your class? Oh, 18. Are you going to celebrate with your classmates? No, Dave, I'm not going to. I said, why not? Dave, they're all dead. He lives in the worst part of Brazil. Even the Brazilians consider it foreign mission. Yes, he lives in the northeast. In fact, the extension director of supporting those in foreign missions and stuff said, I've never seen a priest live in such poverty as he. What happened was, 18 years ago, he read in an article that in Latin America, above all Brazil, there's 3 classes of poor people: the poor, the forgotten, and the abandoned. And that statement said, nobody helps the forgotten. The government gives them nothing, and not even the Catholic Church gives them anything. So he went to live with him. He actually lives in a dump. When that extension director said, he lives in a shack about 6 feet by 8 feet. He has a plank that he lives on. And he lives with the people. I've never seen people live in this pathetic situation any place in the world like he's living. I said to him, I said, your sister tells me you have indoor plumbing now. He said, yeah, Dave. I said, did you want to see a picture? I said, yeah. So he showed me a picture. It's a chair. The top is gone. There are 4 nails and a plastic bag. I said, how does the plumbing work? He said, like this. I told him 2 years ago when he left, I said, when he died. I'm 86 now. I said, nobody wants your job. You're God's presence. 2 weeks ago, he came home from Brazil to celebrate his 80th birthday. He'll be here until his birthday, March 25th. The next day, he will leave back to Brazil. So this is to help him. If you can be generous, we would appreciate it. But this is what happens with this money, to try to reach and help others. Maybe I ought to put this in Scripture. As the gospel, the epistle was read before the service, God had a talk with Abraham, and God said to Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, total, absolutely, completely. And Abraham says, if I find 50 good people, are you telling me you're going to destroy the 50 with them? God said, no. You find 50 good people in Sodom and Gomorrah, I'll spare them all. Abraham said, well, what happens if I can only find 45? You tell me because I couldn't get 5 more, you're going to destroy them? Abraham, you get 45 good people, I'll spare them all. Okay, Abraham? Abraham said, well, I hate to test your patience. What happens if I can only get 40? Abraham, you get 40 good people, I'll spare them. Okay, Abraham? Abraham said, well, I hate to test your patience, but what happens if I can only get 30? Abraham, you get 30 good people, I'll spare them all. Okay, Abraham? Abraham said, well, Lord, I hate to test your patience, but you made me like this. What happens if I can only get 20 good people? Abraham, you get 20 good people, I'll spare them all, Abraham, okay? Abraham said, well, Lord, I hate to test your patience. I know it's endless, but maybe I'm pushing it. But what happens if I can only get 10 good people? Abraham, you get 10 good people, I'll spare them all. God left. My point is this, if tomorrow night, if each and every one of you would donate $1,000, you could help us in our apostolic work of our sick and aids, our seminaries, our missions of Thailand, Brazil, and Africa. And I'm serious as God. If you could donate $1,000 each, you would solve a lot of our problems. You can't do that? Cut it in half. You can't do that? Cut it in half. You can't do that? Cut it in half. There was a limit even God wasn't there? With that, we're going to leave that with you. You have 24 hours to miss it, so you can't say we haven't given you fair warning. To get back into the Spirit, please stand. This is a reading from a letter of Paul to the Colossians. This letter, this paragraph, says everything about the mission. St. Paul wrote in one paragraph the entire mission I have been trying to convey to you. If I could preach like Paul wrote, we would have been done Saturday evening early. If you're interested in this text, it's Colossians 3, verse 12 to 17. Here's what St. Paul wrote. Because you are God's chosen ones, holy, beloved, clothe yourself with heartfelt mercy, with kindness, humility, meekness, patience. Bear with one another. Forgive whatever grievances you have against one another. Forgive as the Lord has forgiven you. Over all these virtues, put on love, which binds the rest together and makes them perfect. Christ's peace must reign in your hearts. Since, as one members of one body, you have been called to that peace. Dedicate yourself to thankfulness. Let the word of Christ, rich as it is, dwell in you. In wisdom, make perfect, instruct, and admonish one another. Sing gratefully to God from your hearts in psalms, hymns, and inspired songs. Whatever you do, whether in speech or in action, do it in the name of the Lord Jesus. Give thanks to God the Father through him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Kindly be seated. God grants to those who are willing to accept the tremendous responsibility of molding life for life, the great pleasure known as sexual pleasure. That is why, in marriage, all sexual pleasure is good and holy. It is the means, it is the method that God has ordained, commanded to be used and utilized to bring peace, warmth, love, tenderness, goodness into one's own personal life, so that it can overflow into one's family life. Now, Jesus comes along and takes this natural bond of marital love and raises it to a supernatural level, making it a sacrament. It's no longer just a good and holy action. It is now a sacrament. Simply put, sacramentally married have marital relations, they renew the sacrament of marriage itself. It's no longer just a good and holy action, it's a sacrament. The day you stood before the altar of God, exchange your vows to love your wife or husband as they are, till death do you part. You were not really married. Not until the act of love was consummated was it a sacramental marriage. Now perhaps you realize what the church demands, that every baptized Catholic enters into a sacramental marriage, so that every act of love will be a means to assist and help them to have peace and happiness and love in their life, in their family. Therefore, anybody who thinks that sex in marriage is wrong, dirty, disgusting, vulgar, is not looking at it with the eyes of God. What God has made is good. What Jesus has raised to the level of a sacrament is holy. I'll give you a parallel. Every time a priest hears confession, celebrates Mass, he renews the sacrament of his ordination. These are the sacraments God has commanded, ordained, that a priest use and utilize to bring peace, warmth, love, tenderness, goodness into the priest's life, so that they can overflow into God's family life. Yet, how often a person's had a sad experience of a priest who misuses his sacrament. He's taken his feelings in confession. He's taken his feelings out of that penitent who has come to seek forgiveness and understanding, reconciliation. And that penitent has left that confessional saying, never, never again. What can that priest say or do to justify the misuse of the great sacrament of reconciliation itself? Sure, he may try to justify the misuse of the sacrament by saying, well, it's hot and stuffy in this confession. What do you people expect of us anyway? We're only human. You say, Father, why don't you practice some discipline and mortification? Why don't you bring your rebellious nature to subjection so you can truly be Christ-like in this confessional? And we're right in condemning that priest's action in the misuse of the great sacrament of reconciliation itself. Or the priest who offers Mass in a very slipshod, fearless, emotionless manner. We say, hey, Father, don't you realize this is the greatest offering we can make to God for God's family? I mean, Father, can't you put a feeling and emotion into it? Sure, he tries to justify the slipshod, feelingless, emotionless offering of the greatest gift that we can make to God for God's family by saying, it's kind of hard to put feeling and emotion into the Mass. You know, I do this every day. What do you people expect of me anyway? I'm only human. We can say, Father, why don't you practice some discipline and mortification and bring your rebellious nature into subjection so you can put feeling and emotion into the greatest gift that we can make to God for God's family. And we're right in condemning that priest's action in the slipshod, feelingless, emotionless offering of the greatest gift we can make to God for God's family. I think you husbands can be compared to the priest in the confessional who takes his feelings out of somebody who's vowed to bring peace and love and goodness. And that husband, just like the priest, tries to justify the misuse of the sacrament. As the priest says, it's hot and stuffy in this confession. What do you people expect of me anyway? I'm only human. We can say to that husband the same thing we say to that priest. Father, why don't you practice some discipline and mortification? Why don't you bring your rebellious nature to subjection so you can truly be a peaceful person, a loving and understanding, caring person? We're right in condemning that husband's action right along with that priest's action in the misuse of the sacrament itself. I think you wives can compare it to the priest who offers Mass in a very slipshod, feelingless, emotionless manner. And that wife, just like the priest, tries to justify the slipshod offering of the greatest gift that we can offer to God's family. As the priest says, you know, it's kind of hard to put feeling and emotion into the Mass. You know, I do this every day, but what do people expect of me anyway? I'm only human. We can say to that wife the same thing we say to that priest. Father, why don't you practice some discipline and mortification? Bring your rebellious nature to subjection so you can put feeling and emotion into the greatest gift we can make to God for God's family. We're right in condemning that wife's action right along with that priest's action and the slipshod offering of the greatest gift we can offer to God for God's family. One reason for going into this in any detail is because those who make their life a study of marriages in counseling tell us this is exactly the area of marital problems. Yes, that is why those who work in marriage counseling tell us they will always come to this area of married life first. Intuitively, they know if the very means God has commanded, ordained to be used and utilized, is being used and used correctly, their problem is a fringe problem then. But the sad commentary of our present day is it's estimated the majority of married wives do not enjoy marital relations with their husband. Maybe this is the major reason why it's commonly estimated 85% of our present marriages are so miserable they would actually separate if they could. Why? The very means God has commanded to be used and utilized is not being used or used incorrectly. And why is this? Because man and woman are uniquely different. Man and woman are uniquely different. The needs of a man and the needs of a woman are vastly different. The husband needs the physical element of sex to have love. The wife needs the romantic psychological element of sex to have love. Only when you bring the two together will you have love. If you have the physical element of sex without the romantic psychological, you have prostitution. If you have the romantic psychological element of sex without the physical, you have adolescence. It is only when you bring the two together do you have love. And here lies the source of many problems in marital life. The needs of husband and wife are going unfulfilled. How often a husband fails to realize how important the little kiss to and from work is so important to his wife's sexuality. How often a husband fails to realize these little dinners with his wife are so important, either together or alone or outside. It's so important to her sexuality. How often a husband fails to realize the little bouquets of flowers for Valentine's, Christmas, Easter, any occasion are so important to his wife's sexuality. The little bouquets of flowers are so forgotten, so abandoned, and they just cannot fathom how important. I'm sure there's not one husband in this church here that can tell me how important flowers are to his wife. I did this in Torrance a couple of years ago. I asked a psychologist. He's been counseling for 35 years. And I said, Doctor, why are flowers so important to a woman? He says, because of the color. I said, they're all the same color. I said, because of the colors. He says, I said, they're all the same color. He said, you know, I never thought about that. I've never realized that. I have to look at it, I just never dawned on me how important flowers are to women. The very next week I was in San Antonio, Texas. The organist was a retired marriage counselor, psychologist. I asked him the same question. He said, well, Freud says it's new life. But he says, you know, I never really thought about this. Most husbands do not fathom how important flowers are to his wife. How often a husband fails to realize how important the cards are to his wife. The cards of birthdays, Christmas, Easter, any occasion. Most husbands cannot fathom the importance of this. Well, what does a husband do when he gets a card? What does a husband do when he gets a card? He slits it open, turns upside down, and shakes to see what falls out. Without taking the card out of the envelope, he sticks his hand inside and says, we have a card here from Philip and Mary. Husband, I'm trying to show you how different man and woman are. Remember, one marriage in 150 is ecstatically happy presently. 90% of marriages can be like that. 85% of our present marriages are so miserable they'd separate if they could. Yet with the same breath they say 98% of marital problems can be solved. Husband, when was the last time you read the verse of that card? The actual verse of the card. Your to spend 3 days going through mall shopping, looking for this verse just for you. Now, wife, bear in mind, it's estimated 54 million American adults are semi-literate. 26 million Americans are totally illiterate. When it comes to reading a verse on a card, your husband qualifies. Why don't you read the verse to him? How often a counselor will have that experience. The counselor will say to the husband, when was the last time you said to your wife, honey, I love you? Husband says, I bought a Mercedes-Benz 9 months ago. The counselor says, no, that was not my question. My question was, when was the last time you said to your wife, honey, I love you? Husband says, I gave her a big coat just a month ago as invitation, but it was expensive, on sale too. But counselor says, no, that was not my question. My question was, when was the last time you said to your wife, honey, I love you? Took her out to dinner 2 nights ago. That's when we decided to come and see the shrink. I didn't counselor. Sorry about that, counselor. The counselor says, no, that was not my question. My question was, when was the last time you said these words or similar words like, honey, H-O-N-E-Y, I, L-O-V-E. Now, this is your wife, right? Oh, I thought this was one of those guessing games. When was the last time I said to my wife, honey, you can't even say it now. Well, let's see now. We were married 28 years. No. We were married 31 years. No. 33 years. Very important date. He can't remember when he was married. Oh, yeah, I remember. It was 34 years ago. It was the night of the honeymoon. Man, I was embarrassed when I said it to him. 34 years ago. And who thinks they're the great economist of the family? The husband, isn't he? If the husband only realized it's the little things that are so important to his wife's life. How many Mercedes-Benz and mint coats and dinners could have been saved? Husband, your wife would rather have a rose a day with the words, I love you, than a Mercedes-Benz. For the time to take it paid off, you would save a tremendous amount in interest. Yes, husband, your wife would rather have a rose a day with the words, I love you, than almost anything you can give. And bear in mind, wife, your husband is different than yourself. Your husband's needs, your husband's life. Your husband's strength and weakness. Your husband's Achilles' heel is his ego. Never tamper with it. Never say to your husband, why can't you get a job like Mr. So-and-so? Never do that. Oh, why can't we have things like Mr. So-and-so? Never compare your husband with another man. He can't take it. You'll destroy him. If instead you foster your husband's ego, you get across to your husband that he is the greatest, most important man in your world, he will fulfill all your expectations beyond a shadow of a doubt. You say to your husband, you know, honey, if you weren't working that corporation from 2 in the morning until 7, that corporation would be in a shambles. Honey, I need it. If you weren't working that corporation from 2 in the morning until 7, pushing that broom around, it'd be a mess in that corporation. You get across to your husband that his pushing of that broom is that important to you. He'll push that broom to the top executive suite. He'll sit there not from 2 in the morning, no, from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 in the evening. Why? Because you put him there. Do they not say that behind every great man is a greater woman? Remember, when you are physically, mentally exhausted, you have used no more than 10% of your physical and mental energies. 90% is still in reserve, and you as a wife have a key to unleash that tremendous potential within your husband's life. Look at the marathoners. Look at the Iron men and women. Look at the maximum marathons. You're familiar with the maximum marathon? In which they run 5 marathons the same day they start. Where do they run this? In August, when? Through Death Valley up until Mount Whitney. Yes. When you're physically, mentally exhausted, you use no more than 10% of your physical and mental energies. 90% is in reserve. And you as a wife have a key to unleash that tremendous potential. Oh, yes, wife, you may think you read your husband like a book. He's so simple. All right. What is the husband saying when he comes home from work? He sees a pill on the floor. And a volcanic eruption of anger, he explodes and says, you know, if there was an award for the worst mother of the year, you'd win. Look at this pin. And we have little children. What is the husband saying? He's that simply bad, isn't he? Oh, you're out there in the kitchen, you're getting ready for supper. You hear this little wreckage off the hallways as they're coming from the bathroom, down the hall, into the kitchen. What are you doing around here anyway? Where's the soap? All they have to do is turn around and take the soap out of the cupboard. Is that what the husband's saying? There's a little pin on the floor? There's no soap in the dish? Is that what your husband is saying? Now, we're not talking about whose job, what job. Oh, yes, wife, you had 3 jobs that day, didn't you? Your first job was to get everybody dressed, fed, and out, plus yourself. Your second job was the same as your husband, with all the responsibilities, half the pay. And now your third job is trying to feed the family. So we're not talking about whose job, what job. We're talking about what is the husband saying? There's a pin on the floor, there's no soap in the dish. Is that what he's saying? The husband is saying, I am a man. I am a man. What's the wife saying? Oh, no, you're not. So she cuts his Achilles heel. What does his mother, what does his father now do? This husband now do? This man. He now turns to his 7-year-old son. And he says to his 7-year-old son, you just stand right there, kid. I'll show you who's a man in this family, kid, if I have to beat the living tar out of you, kid. He can't prove to his wife he's a man because she'll not allow him. So he's going to prove it to his children if he has to beat them. Yes, wife, you may think you read your husband like a book, but it's in a language you'll never understand. Remember, wife, your husband lives in a world of fear, of stress, of tension, of anxiety. Your husband lives in a world in which he trusts no one. The only one he'll allow within the realm of his trust is you, his wife. If you are his biggest backer, his biggest booster, his biggest ally, his confidant, his lover. But if you ever jeopardize that trust, he will withdraw within his citadel, and you won't even know what happened. Oh, yes, wife, it's true. You live in the same world that we live in. Same as your husband. You live in a world of stress, of tension, anxiety, fear. Yes, you do. But you're the survivor. You're the survivor. What has man throughout the pages of history done when he's been bruised and bloodied and hurt? He's withdrawn within his cave, barricading the entrance, allowing no one within his realm of trust. Paranoid is second nature to man. What have you as a wife done throughout the pages of history when you've been bruised and bloodied and hurt? You cried out, yelled, searched, and found a solution. Yes, wife, you are the survivor. Bear in mind, husband, your wife's strength and your wife's Achilles heel, her weakness, is to be needed, to be loved. Husband, why do you think your husband has those terrible headaches, stomach aches, fits of cheer or anger? Is your wife saying, like your eyes saying, like a terrible headache and stomach ache? Your wife is really saying, need me, need me. What's the husband say? I don't need anybody. So he cuts her Achilles heel. He leaves her in a heap of pain and suffering. Like 2 ships at sea at night, they pass each other. And they fire a little facetious dig at the expense of the other. A little joke at the expense of the other. A little silence at the expense of the other. A little digging statement at the expense of the other. And every one of these shells hits the ammunition aboard the state of married life. And who are the real victims of this modern warfare of married life? The children, torn, bruised, and bloodied. The little kids are being carried on stretchers out of this warfare. Well, what do the kids say as they're carried out? I know mommy's different from daddy. I know daddy's different from mommy. Don't you know you're different? Don't you know you're different? Remember, the most you can hope to learn of yourself is only 20%. 80% will remain hidden from the depth of your being. It will affect everything you believe, think, say, and do. If you have an open mind and an open heart, and avail yourself, you will acquire knowledge and wisdom. I'd like to give you 2 examples of 2 words to show you how different you really are. 2 words. Before we go to this last one, I think we'll stand and stretch. I would urge, if you're having problems in your marriage, and if you want to have happiness in your marriage, there's 2 methods pulled, and you'll find every place in the United States and even in North America and the world. One is called Marriage Encounter. Marriage Encounter is renowned throughout the world to give the best tools of communication for married couples. If you have made Marriage Encounter, remember they gave you the tools. Utilize them correctly. Do not exaggerate them. Follow them. It's renowned for giving the best tools of communication for married couples. The model of a married couple is you don't make it because you have to. You make it because you owe it to yourself. The better your marriage, the more you get out of it. The bottom line of coming into it would be that you're at least married but singly living your lives. That's the bottom. There's another method, but the better your marriage, the more you get out of it. It's renowned. The second method is called reprobate. Reprobate is for those who are divorced or separated or have a major problem. It's renowned to be almost 90% effective in bringing those couples together, called reapproachment. Every diocese, every parish has this. Look into it. I'm sure you might have it in your parish bulletin. But in every parish, every diocese has this. I have talked to so many who have made both, and it's changed their marriage. 2 simple words to show you how different you really are. Remember, the most you can hope to learn of yourself is only 20%. 2 words. Wife, how do you feel when your husband says to you, honey, I love you? It affects the fibers of your life, doesn't it? Husbands, if you learn nothing the entire time of mission but this, put it into practice. If you would say to your wife, honey, I love you, you'll change the whole thrust of your married life. Standing here before the altar of God in the presence of Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, I reiterate how much I mean about this. Husbands, if you learn nothing the entire time of mission but this, put it into practice 10 times a day in some form or some manner. If you would actually say to your wife, honey, I love you, you'll change the thrust of your married life. Now bear in mind, wife, you don't have to tell your husband that you love him. You can say January 1st, honey, I love you. Good for a whole year. Wife, what your husband needs to hear from you, and standing here before the altar of God in the presence of Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, how important this statement. Wife, if you learn nothing the entire time of mission but this, put it into practice 10 times a day in some form or some manner, you would say to your husband, honey, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. You'll change the whole thrust of your married life. Wife, how do you feel when your husband says to you, honey, I'm proud of you? Big deal, right? But you know how you feel when your husband says, honey, I love you. It affects the fibers of your life. When you say to your husband, honey, I love you, he can't fathom that word. But when you say to your husband, honey, I'm proud of you, ooh, you better believe he can understand that. You want to experiment? Say it to a 4-year-old or 5-year-old boy, or 5-year or 4-year-old girl. Say it to the kid. Say it to the little girl, honey, I'm proud of you. You say to the little girl, honey, I love you. Ooh. You say to the little boy, honey, I love you. You say to the little boy, honey, I'm proud of you. How different must you really be? In concluding, we'll go just a few moments over. I would like to conclude with a very important element. Many enter into an adult relationship with childish ideas of right and wrong, causing terrible problems. One thinks it right, one thinks it's wrong, causing unnecessary pain and suffering. As I said earlier, every husband husband and wife who are validly sacramentally married have marital relations, they renew the sacrament of marriage itself. It's no longer just a good and holy action, it's now a sacrament. The ideal is to reach the climax simultaneously. That is the ideal. If your marriage is perfect, it would occur only once out of 90 to 150 times. That does not mean that you do not have the right to use self-stimulating masturbatory actions to prepare yourself to try to attain that ideal. And if it is not attained simultaneously, there is nothing wrong with using self-stimulating masturbatory actions to bring this about. This is the means that God has ordained, commanded, to be used and utilized to bring peace, warmth, love, tenderness, goodness into one's own personal life, so that it can overflow into one's family life. Remember, in marriage, you cannot be impure. You're entitled to all sexual pleasure. The ideal is what you attain, try to attain. That is the ideal. You can be unjust, yes. You can be uncharitable, yes. But you cannot be impure, since you're entitled to all sexual pleasure to try to attain that ideal. How would a husband and wife be unjust or uncharitable? How do we love God? With our mind, our heart, our soul, our being, everything we are. How do we do this? The way you love your neighbor. In your case, your husband or your wife. With your mind, your heart, your soul, your body, your being, everything that you are. How would a husband or wife be unjust? Having sexual pleasure, your mind, heart, soul, body, being, in which the spouse is not the recipient. That is an injustice. And the gravity of this injustice can be lessened in proportion that you try to make up this injustice. Yes, the gravity of this injustice can be lessened in proportion that you do something equally pleasing for your spouse, the injustice you have worked against him or her. The gravity can be lessened, therefore it's not serious. That means when you come to confession, when you come to communion, you still can go to confession, since only mortal sins keep us from going to communion. When you come to confession, you don't even have to bring this up, because only mortal sins must be confessed. Something I'll explain tomorrow. How would a husband and wife be uncharitable? Trying to share with your spouse, their mind, their heart, their soul, their body, their being, the way your husband or wife has been raised, would be offended, would be devastated, would be crucified, would be uncharitable. Maybe that day will happen when the two of you reach that maturity, that you realize that your wife or husband is using their mind, heart, soul, body, being to bring to a greatness of love for you. Then the two of you reach that maturity. You cannot be impure. You can be unjust. You can be uncharitable. Maybe the day will happen. You'll be able to share. Until now, because the way your husband or wife was raised, they would be devastated if you tried to share with them. That would be uncharitable. Give you a parallel. You take the case of a priest. That Saturday, he is so involved with situations and everything is going sour. From the morning when the toast falls face down onto the kitchen floor, he knows there's a bad woman. Sure enough, everything in that morning has gone sour. Even in the afternoon, no matter what he does, he is so stressed and tense because of it. And now he comes at 3:30 for reconciliation. And unbeknown to him, everybody in the Highland has come for confession. He knows to take that chair of judgment and to truly be Christ-like is impossible. So he begins to think of himself as a Supreme Court justice who is going to the High Court of judgment of life and death. Now he cannot tell the penitents that he is thinking of himself as Supreme Court justice. They wouldn't understand what's wrong with him. But there's nothing wrong with him to use his mind, heart, soul, body, being to bring his body to subjection, so that when he takes that seat of judgment, he can truly be Christ-like in helping that penitent to find peace and happiness. Or you take that priest, because of that day, he has the 6:30 morning mass Saturday morning. Because of sickness, he also takes the 8 o'clock mass too. He had planned on a 9 o'clock mass with the CCD kids who were gathering. Yeah, he funeral mass at 10 and 11:30. Hadn't planned most funeral masses at all. Yeah, he had planned a 2 o'clock wedding mass and also the 3:30 mass. And now he comes for the 5 o'clock Saturday evening mass. To put feeling and emotion to the mass is impossible. So he begins to think of himself as a priest of yesteryear, who would go to the mount to offer a bloody sacrifice. Now he cannot tell the attendants of the Saturday evening mass that he's thinking of himself like Abraham, who was going to Mount Moriah to offer his son in a bloody sacrifice. They wouldn't understand what's wrong with him. But there's nothing wrong with him to use his mind, heart, soul, body, being to bring his body to subjection, so that he can put true meaning and feeling in the mass. This is the sacrament. This is the church. I would urge you, the more knowledge you acquire, the more you're going to realize what you don't know. The more holy you become, the more unholy you're going to realize you are. The more mature you become, the more immature you're going to realize you are. And the more you love your wife or husband, the more you're going to realize you don't love. It's not accepting it. It's a process that's called love and peace and knowledge. I hope you consider, as I said at the very beginning, we were trying to open a few doors so that you could be open and sincere without reprisal to discuss with your spouse. That was my hope in this instruction. For those of you who did not need this information, I thank you for your indulgence and your patience and endurance. I hope maybe this information might help you to help others. You are the church as much as I am. Maybe this information might assist you to help them. How many have come to you because they trust you so much? They believe in you, and they're in pain and suffering. Maybe this information will help you to help them. I have been teaching this information from the pulpit, from the altar, for 41 years now. Every priest has been educated and trained at this level. Yes. When can a priest convey this? Sunday homily? Certainly not. Even at a retreat for married couples, because it's so sensitive and so sacred. It's almost impossible to bring this up. But this is the teaching, if you want to read it. Pick up a moral text called The Accessory Reactions on Marital Relations in Your Moral Doctrines. And you'll see what I have given to you tonight is exactly from the pages of moral theology. Our problem is, when can we teach this? It is so sensitive and so sacred. It's so difficult to face up to it. If I have been offensive in any shape, size, or form, it was not my intention. I ask your indulgence and understanding. My hope is maybe you can open a few doors now for yourself and for others. Let us now close with our closing hymn, Glory and Praise to God.